Welcome, everyone. My name is Ryan Pickering. I'm an energy policy researcher based in Berkeley, California. A few weeks ago, Dr. Rodberg and I had the pleasure of having our op-ed published in the Capital Weekly, where we were critiquing California's 100% clean energy goals by 2045. That op-ed received a lot of traction, and we've received a tremendous amount of feedback. And so we were really grateful when the Anthropocene Institute reached out to us and wanted to host this call and have a public discussion about this opportunity, about the future of clean energy in California, a state that has, decided to lead this movement globally. So we think we so appreciate everyone being here and seeing the leadership opportunity that we have. So I'll be turning the microphone over to Dr. Len Rodberg. I had the pleasure of working with Dr. Rodberg on this project for the past few months, digging into what is the minute by minute source of energy in our state, beyond renewable energy certificates, beyond all these rumors about where our energy comes from. What does the actual data say, and where are we headed? So I've learned so much from Dr. Rodberg through this process, and been able to contribute some of my own research. I'll be moderating this session and addressing questions at the end. But at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Rodberg so he can present his research.
Thank you very much, Ryan. It's been a pleasure working with you. I'm very, very happy to be here and to be talking to people in California, and I assume a variety of other places too. I'm based in New York, and I've been looking in the last few years at New York's energy plan, which is modeled on California's, and that this is an opportunity with the support of Anthropocene and the Walker Foundation to look at California, which has been touted as the model for what we should be doing. And as you'll see, I have a lot of questions about that model. A little bit about me. I was trained as a nuclear physicist at MIT, but I did research in that field for a couple of years, but then I went to work in the State Department, where under the John Kennedy administration, where they were setting up an arms control and disarmament agency, and I worked on nuclear arms control. That got me into public policy, and I never left the field of public policy development and critique. In the 1970s, I was in Washington at a think tank during the energy crisis of the 70s, and I became a fan of solar energy. I published a book on solar energy programs. I did analysis on the job benefits of solar and wind. I moved to Queens College and taught urban study and urban policy for 35 years. And then along the way, I created a course on climate change. And I taught my students that the solution to climate change was solar and wind. And when I retired 8 years ago, I decided I'd work on climate change as the most critical issue we face. And I very quickly discovered that I was wrong, that what I had taught my students was simply incorrect, that solar was fine in the 70s when all we wanted to do was reduce our use of oil a little bit and get some protection from rising prices. But to try to run the society on solar and wind is simply impossible. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you, I think. So I want to share my screen now. I'm going to use slides. I hope I will do my best to explain them to you. And if you have questions about them, we look forward to answering them. So here we go. So here's our identification, the support for this project, and the full report, which will contain the slides I'm going to use here, plus some more with more explanation, is available at the link that I show here. So let's get started. Let me get it moving. Here's the outline of what I'm going to do. Things are getting ahead of ourselves here. First, I'm going to describe to you what California's current plan is for decarbonizing its electric grid. Then I'm going to show a new model of it, a new computer model far superior to, in fact, to what California and other states, including New York, have been using. And then I will show you what's wrong with California's plan. And finally, we'll show you some alternatives that will work and will do what we need, which is we need to stop putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and warming up the climate. So here's the story that you're told. This is a quote from Bill McKibben in New Yorker magazine. He went to California and stayed with Mark Jacobson and concluded that California has proved by what its current experience that you can run things without anything but solar energy. And Mark Jacobson almost daily is touting how much power we're getting in California from solar power. That's the hype. Here's the reality. Let me explain this graph. You're going to see a number of them like it, so it's really important that you understand it. The single blue line here, that's the need for electricity by each hour. This is a graph showing you energy use and production from each source from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock the next morning. And this is the average for the average day in 2045 if California's current plan goes through. So if I start at the bottom and show you here, at the bottom is a little bit of nuclear from Diablo Canyon. Then there's water power. There's geothermal. Some geothermal energy. Then the blue is water power. Is wind. I'm sorry. Is land-based wind and offshore wind. Both are in California's current plan. Then we get to the solar. The yellow is rooftop solar. The orange is utility scale solar, the big solar farms that spread out over the land. Then we get to the line of the actual use that you add those add up to the demand, which you see is high in the morning and then drops off in the evening, overnight some, but not completely. We got to keep the refrigerators going, the data centers going, and so on. What's this red above? That's the batteries being charged because the California plant has a lot of batteries which are charged by solar energy during the day when there's more than we need. So the batteries get charged. And sometimes there's more solar than you can actually use, and it's kind of dumped or just shut down. That's the dashed red lines. So what are we seeing here? You see that for the first 8 hours or so in this average day, the sun dominates the source of energy and provides it, plus these other less smaller sources together meet the demand. But then the sun goes down, and what happens? The batteries discharge. The purple is the discharge of the batteries, which were charged during the day, and in the afternoon and early evening, they discharge, but then they run out. And then you get this gray. And what's the gray? It's natural gas. From the afternoon all through the night till the next morning, we're burning natural gas, fossil fuels. So if you're one of the people who own or planning to own a Tesla or some other electric vehicle, General Motors and so on, if you park it at night and plug it in, you're going to be charging it with natural gas. That is fossil fuels. It will not be clean. This is California. This is the reality of California's plan, which, as you'll see, is touted as being 100% clean. If you take one message away from what I'm telling you, is that the California's plan is not 100% clean. So here's the laws that California is attempting to use to achieve a decarbonized state by 2045. First is its overall law on reducing greenhouse gases, encouraging purchase of electric vehicles, encouraging electrification of building heating, encouraging efficiency. And then there's SB 100, called the 100% Clean Energy Act. And it requires that by 2045, all the electricity produced in the state and purchased in the state be 100% clean, no carbon dioxide emissions. Um, the idea is to electrify most applications that use fossil fuels today and then generate your electricity with clean sources. There's no nuclear expansion beyond the retention of at least one of the two units at Diablo Canyon in the current plan. Well, here's the history. Here's California's history up until now. The same colors as I showed you before. This is from basically 2001 up to last year. The big gray at the top is natural gas. And what you can see here, look at a few things. Here's the shutdown in 2011, 2012 of the San Onofre nuclear plant. And what was it replaced with? It was replaced with natural gas. You can see the natural gas grows just as San Onofre decreases. The San Onofre and Diablo Canyon are the green here. Then solar energy picks up from 2012, and there's been a big growth in utility scale. That's the orange, utility scale solar. So you're now back, so that the natural gas burned today is about equal to what was being burned in California 20 years ago. So haven't made a lot of progress, but spent a good bit of money so far. So let's see where we're going. This is the plan for the future. The colors are a little different here because this is taken from the state's report, California State Energy Commission's report. So the blue is an extrapolation or a projection of today's usage, with the population growing some and more uses of electricity overall. But the red here is the expansion and the replacement of gasoline powered cars with electric vehicles. And this is trucks, same thing for trucks. The purple here is the electrification of buildings, replacement of gas furnaces with heat pumps or electric radiant heating. This shows hydrogen production, but there's none actually shown here. So here's the plan. I point out to you that it says it's going to provide 100% clean electricity. It has, and here it is in 2045. Again, I'll go up from the bottom. The bottom here is wind. You can see the colors. Their color is a little different than mine, but that's okay. Then there's utility scale. You see a huge growth in it from today's relatively small amount compared to what's planned to this huge growth. Then there is then there's offshore wind here, this light blue, and then there's a big expansion in storage, because we want to. The whole idea there is to store the sun's energy during the day and use it at night. But of course, you have to charge the batteries up. Batteries are not a source of energy; they're just a way of storing energy that's produced some other way. So that's the plan that the state has. This is the state's view of the result. The goal, again, as it says here, is achieving 100% clean electricity. But if you look over here, here's the gray, and the gray, if you look down here, is gas. There is still gas. This is the only piece of information I've been able to find in any state documentation admitting that there is still natural gas being burned, and quite a good bit of it compared to today. See, here's 2027's gas burning. Here's today. This dotted line is actually in the graph not explained, but it is, I believe, the greenhouse gas emissions. And they're down, but there's still a lot of them. They're not at zero. That's the percents here. So the program is touted to be clean, but it isn't. And but I'm going to show you quite clearly, as I just did, but I'm going to show you in more detail that that's the case. It costs, by the way, $1 trillion of investment over the next 20 years is projected to build all this, to expand all the solar that's expanded here, all the storage. So I discovered a little more than 2 years ago that two engineers in Massachusetts had developed a very straightforward software package. It runs on Excel that will, in fact, tell us how such a grid actually works, hour by hour. in a very, very clear and I think transparent way. Um, the lead is Reiner Kuhr, who's an experienced engineer, worked with Stone and Webster, which has built power plants all over the world. And Ahmad Nofal is a programmer working for a nuclear startup, X Energy, which is building one of the new small modular reactors. Um, so what does their model do? Their organization they call the Center for Academic Collaborative Initiatives, or CACI. So I'm referring to it here, right here, as the CACI hourly dispatch model. What do I mean by that? It calculates for every hour of a year, and there are 8,760 hours in a year. So for each hour of the year, it calculates what uh, how much each source will provide or has to provide in order to meet the need, in order to meet the projected demand in 2045. And when electricity is generated, the experts in the field refer to that as dispatch. So it's an hourly dispatch model. So it calculates for every hour what the output of every source needs to be in order to meet that load. It uses data from a past year, and I use 2023 to provide actual solar and wind output, just scaled up because there will be more solar, according to the state's model, there'll be more solar and wind sources available, equipment available in a lot more than 2045 than there is now. It introduces each source step by step, and it charges the batteries with whatever solar and wind output isn't needed. That is, you have a lot of new solar and wind built in the state's plan, and so as I showed you a few minutes ago, there's more available than is needed, and you use that to charge the batteries. And you shut down what if you get an excess, you shut it down because you can't overload the system. California uses a model developed by a consulting firm in San Francisco called E3, and it's called the Resolve model. It's a very different kind of model. It looks over a total of 20 years and attempts to optimize to achieve the minimum cost over that 20 years. It analyzes the output of each source. It does not take account of the time dependence of solar and wind, but it does recognize that they aren't 100% efficient. And in California, for instance, for every kilowatt of solar, for instance, you get about a quarter of a kilowatt on average over the year because of cloudy days and because of nighttime. And lastly, that model doesn't look at every day in the year. It looks at only 1 out of every 10 days, in effect. One result of that is it can't tell you how the batteries function because you need multiple days in order to look at the role of storage over time period. I'll show you that in a few minutes. So the assumptions I use, I won't go them in detail, but they're in the report you can read. But basically, I'm using, as I said, the hourly data from last year that's published by the folks who run California's grid, called the California Independent System Operator. I treat California as a single zone rather than segmented zones, as CAISO does recognize. And then I use the projections of what the demand will be in 2045 from the state's California Energy Commission. And the cost figures, I use the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, which provides a standardized baseline. I have a lot of questions about it because it assumes that the cost will keep dropping, and even though the demand will be rising. But I've used that, as you'll see. So here's how the grid operates today, looking at over a year. The colors are the same as I've shown you before. What you have here is you have a summer peaking system, of course, and your air conditioning load comes up there. What you can see here a little bit is in April, the demand is still low, but there's a lot of sun in California in the spring. And so you get the batteries being charged here and then discharged here. But there's no batteries useful in the load is so great that the solar and the wind can't aren't there's no excess to charge the battery, so they don't really play a role here, and they don't play a role in the beginning and end of the year in the winter time because not enough sun. I'll show you that in a few minutes. So this is the current situation. Um, I won't say too much about this. The model tells you how much each of the sources is used, and what you can see is that gas provides a little more than a third of the load uh, today. This is today's situation, and the solar already provides 27, 28%. You've been building substantially over the last decade, so it's playing a big role. Well, here's the picture. Looks like the picture I showed you before, but this is last year, and this is particular days. This is January 1st, April 1st, July 1st, and October 1st. And you can see the same picture. This starts at 8 in the morning, goes to 8 the next morning. So the sun plays a role, particularly in the spring. The demand is low and the sun is high. So you get a little bit of battery charging and then discharging, but otherwise a lot of burning of gas, particularly at night. So here's projecting to 2045. This is the key picture. It's pretty spectacular. This is actually what I've got. What you're looking at here is a 7-day rolling average, because you'd see sun, particularly wind, fluctuates minute by minute, and the diagram would just go wild. It's a wild diagram if you look at it by minute or even hour by hour. But if you smooth it out, this is what you get. You can see that in 2045, this is the state's plan. They're burning a lot of gas, particularly in the summer peak and in the winter when, as I said, the sun isn't as strong and you don't get as much help from solar energy as you do in the summertime. So there's a large gap right here between what is provided by all these other renewable and clean sources and what's needed. Again, the solid line is the demand, which again is high in the summer, but also growing in the winter because you're electrifying the heating, and you need that. That provides that requires heating, requires more electricity. Gas, remember before it was providing about 37% of the load. Now it's providing about round off 18% of the load. It's still important, and in fact, well, and here's the daily picture for those same 4 days in 2045. And in January, you're burning a lot of gas because you can't fully charge the batteries, and they run out within an hour or two because the sun is weaker, so you don't have as much excess sun as you did do in the summertime. See, here's the summer. This is July 1st, and the batteries last longer in the summer because they're fully charged. But even then, they run out, and to keep the refrigerators going and the data centers running, you've got to burn gas. So gas is burned, three-fourths of the year. As I said, in April, there are some days when you don't need the gas because there's enough sun and low enough demand. Here's an example. This is wintertime. Here's a week in December of 2045, and you can see there are days when when the batteries never get recharged. There's never enough sun or wind to get to just barely meet demand, and they don't charge up the batteries. So you're dependent on a lot of gas throughout this week. And here's just to put it in numbers, the gas has been reduced by 19%. That is, we're burning 81% as much gas as in 2045 as we were in 2023. So the grid is not being decarbonized, and the plan is not leading California to a clean future. So
Dr. Rodberg,
I've thrown a lot at you, so let's take a little break and see
Dr. Rodberg, do you think that you kind of alluded that one of your slides shows that some people in California know that we're going to be using gas in 2045, but so many of the other models say that it's going to be 100% clean energy by 2045. Do you think that California leaders know the information that you're showing us?
Well, I'll give them credit, the leaders credit. They've signed off on these reports, which say that California, you saw it, the governor's put out a report about here's our plan for 100% clean in 2045. But the analysts know that that's not true. They have to, because in fact, the California Energy Commission has actually published the results of the E3 analysis in great detail. They published the model, they published the results of all the runs. And if you look at them and look at what is actually the consumption of gas and of the solar and so on in 2045 in their model, it's substantial. It's not nearly as big as what I found. It's about a third of it, but it's there. And it's there, as I say, in that one graph I discovered in this joint report that the state agencies put out. But it's clearly not clean. And as I say, the analysts know it. You mentioned models showing 100%. I don't know a model that actually shows that 100% works. I know people who claim that 100% solar and wind and batteries work, but I have yet to see a model that's believable. And what I'm showing you makes almost in a way there's no assumptions except a single zone, which just means that electricity flows more. It's the most efficient system you can have, and you still find that the solar and wind get around and aren't sufficient, even though you've spent $1 trillion.
Fascinating. Well, we've got some great questions in the chat that we'll address first during Q&A. Why don't we continue? And Dr. Rodberg.
Sure, glad to. Let's
And
go
and
on.
for anyone who wants to put more questions in the chat, please log them. We're going through a lot of information here. There are no stupid questions. We look forward to getting to them live at in 10 more minutes or so. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Okay, so what do we do about this? California, I just showed just the same graph I showed you a few minutes ago. There's a large gap to be filled between what the renewables are able to provide and what you actually need. And it's not just that there isn't enough renewables, it's that there are days when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And it could be multiple days. I showed you a typical week in 2045 when that's the case. So it's not just a matter of adding more, it's that the situation is such that such intermittent sources that are also time dependent. Remember, sun doesn't shine at night. People don't always remember that. So you need something that will carry you through the night to keep keep your food protected in your refrigerators, as well as to keep all the data centers and the internet running throughout the night. So what we need is what is called by people who work in this field, it's called a DEFR. We need a dispatchable emission-free resource. Emission-free means doesn't produce greenhouse gases. Dispatchable means it's always available. It can be turned on and used moment by moment to meet so that the need gets met. If you have a situation where the grid is not getting the power that it needs, that the users in the state are, if you turn your light switch on and the light doesn't go on, the system has not been able to provide enough electricity. So it needs on a moment by moment basis to be able to do that. And that means you need a flexible, available resource. The sun and the wind are not flexible. They respond to geology and the solar system and the weather. We need something that's better. As I suggested, you might install more renewables. That gets very expensive and destroys a lot of land. But it doesn't work because there are still significant periods when there's no sun and no wind and the batteries can't be charged. So a grid needs a clean, firm, dispatchable source. Number of suggestions have been made. There could be long duration storage. That doesn't help. You still need to charge them. Um, Hydrogen has been suggested. It has a lot of problems. It doesn't. You can't put it through ordinary pipes. It has to be produced. It's not an energy source. Again, it's not something you can find in nature. You have to produce it. You have to use energy to break the water molecules apart to get the hydrogen. Or you could. Another suggestion that the oil industry likes is capture the carbon coming out of the oil burning and gas burning plants. That's very expensive, and it hasn't been demonstrated anywhere. Uh, what is practical is nuclear power. It provides 20%, has been providing 20% of electricity in the United States and a smaller percentage worldwide, but it works and it's safe, it's emission free, it's reliable, it's scalable, and it can be run flexibly. The French run it flexibly, and we can too. Here's an example of a flexible nuclear plant that's being developed now and actually being installed with assuming the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, gives its approval in Wyoming within this decade. It's called the Natrium. It consists of a reactor. Uh, their particular model is 345 megawatts. The reactor produces heat. Basically, nuclear fission, its major output is heat. The heat is used to warm up a salt, a tank full of material that can get very hot and without melting. And that storage is then connected to a turbine, and so that and the turbine is connected to the grid. So whenever the grid needs power, the steam is produced from this storage tank. It runs the turbine. You get electricity. Note here, air cooling. This kind of reactor can be put at any place. It doesn't have to be near a river because it's small enough it can be cooled by the airflow. So this is a model of a DEFR, of a dispatchable emission-free source that I used in a model to say, what can we replace natural gas with? And here's the answer. Here's the SB core model, but with this what I'm calling flex nuclear to fill in the gap between the renewables and what you actually need. It's expensive because but it's no more expensive. It's no more expensive than what we just saw. Well, actually, it depends on the cost of nuclear versus the NREL data projects real reduction in the price of solar and wind. We're not actually seeing that these days, but they're hopeful. Anyway, this is a model that will do it. Here's a better model. Instead of building all that solar and wind, which destroys land and uses a lot of mined materials that we import from China and South Africa and other places, shrink down how much solar and wind you're going to be building and put in some baseload nuclear, like have some more Diablo Canyon kind of plants that run 24/7 and provide the steady flow of power that we need. And then for the variable power, use the natrium. And that's what this model is. So this is baseload nuclear, flex nuclear, and then only just 20% of what the SB 100 expansion of solar and wind projects, with no batteries, because the batteries, you don't need the batteries if you have the base load nuclear and the flexible nuclear. And this is less expensive. Another example is to use hydrogen. But in this case, this is the way you store hydrogen, and this is a turbine that can run it. You can use the gas turbines that we have today, but put in different kind of burners, and they can run hydrogen. Where do you get the hydrogen? Well, my suggestion is you get the hydrogen using nuclear power. Use the heat, combination of the heat that reactors produce and the electricity they can be used to produce. That combination will allow you very efficiently to separate the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen. And it's being done on a demonstration basis with some DOE funding across the country, including in New York State. And so use nuclear power to produce the hydrogen, and you get this model where, again, we have the base load of expanded baseload nuclear, plus hydrogen turbines providing the flexible sources you need to meet the moment by moment demand. If you compare the cost, here's the current cost. This is not the cost to the consumer, which includes the cost of distributing the electricity. This is the cost of producing it at the plant, and then you have the additional cost of transmitting it and distributing it to the customer. So this is in megawatt hours per dollar. I guess most people are more familiar with kilowatt hours. The cost. So this is 7 cents a kilowatt hour is the current wholesale cost, and you can see that the nuclear, given projections of what you can do if we start mass producing these, particularly these small nuclear reactors in factories, we can get down to costs that are comparable or even lower. So it's cost efficient. So California's current plan will not significantly reduce the consumption of fossil-based natural gas. Its model gives misleading results because it doesn't take account of the time dependence and the weather dependence of solar and wind. You need a defer. You need a firm dispatchable source, and nuclear can provide it. I guess I want to close by noting that this has been a quite extraordinary week. The three leading tech firms, Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, have all announced they're buying nuclear plants because they don't see any other way to get reliable electric power that they need for the data centers that they're all dependent on. Even New York State, which has been following California's all renewable model, announced last month that in a conference that the governor called, that it was going to start including nuclear in its energy planning. And so California's got to catch up now with New York and start to particularly get rid of the moratorium that exists on new nuclear, 50-year-old moratorium saying don't build any new nuclear. If you don't build new nuclear, you're not going to have a decarbonized grid. That's the short message of what I'm telling you. So the report, which has these slides plus some more explanation, is available publicly. The op-ed that Ryan wrote is available. And here's how you can contact your legislator. And this is the message to tell them. We got to build new nuclear. You've got to remove the moratorium so we can start planning the way New York is now doing. So thank you. And I look forward to dealing with any questions you have.
Unbelievable, Dr. Rodberg. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us and inputting the questions in the chat. We already have 8 phenomenal questions. Goes to show how much expertise is in the room. So I'll begin, and please continue to put the questions in the chat. We've got 20 minutes to discuss. Thankfully, we have Rainer in the room, one of the authors of the methodology that we used for this, and he is asking some very tough questions. Dr. Rodberg, Rainer asks, how are you addressing reliability to meet peaks and contingencies without gas?
Well, the nature model addresses reliability by having that storage of heat. You can expand it. You saw in the picture, they had 2 tanks giving you the ability to get 500 megawatts for at least 5 hours of high temperature. Those high temperature tanks can hold it. I would have, you're going to need many of them. If you look at the numbers there, you'll need, I won't use a number, but you need, look, it takes 3 of those to equal 1 unit at Diablo Canyon, 1,000, which are 1,000 megawatt units. So you need them linked together, but they provide the reliability that we need.
Wonderful, Dr. Rodberg.
You need flexibility in order to have a reliable grid, because people do turn their light switches and their air conditioners on and off, and people do plug in their electric vehicles, and whenever that's plugged in, you've got to have an increase or a decrease in the power because the grid has to respond moment by moment.
And I would also add to that that all of this chemical battery storage that we're creating today will be available to be charged by nuclear as well. So we can use the load shifting and the grid quality aspects that chemical energy storage can bring. Also, we have plenty of pumped hydro and hydroelectric resources that will be slowly winding down, but those should still be available for balancing and peaking
Right.
loads. And we'll also have some geothermal, hopefully by then, which we could ramp up and use the capacity factor during peaking moments. And that kind of gets into some other questions. Moving on from Chris, do we have do we know what the capacity factor of the gas plants are in 2045 versus what they are now? It looks like we have more capacity with less output, which means more fixed costs and stranded assets that aren't being utilized to their full extent.
Exactly, absolutely right. If you get the full report, you'll see at the end of it, there are a whole set of data sheets which show the capacity factors for each of the sources. Capacity factor is the fraction of the available output that's actually used. And those are all in the data sheets that are attached to the full report that's available at the link. Maybe I'll share it again here briefly again so you can see it.
And Dr. Rodberg, you kind of showed some pricing projections for 2045. And essentially, what we were concerned about when putting this report together is because we are reliant on natural gas still in 2045, and that these assets will be running at a lower capacity factor, that will all come at a cost to ratepayers, which has significant social justice and economic challenges associated with it. So, there's a motivation to move away from natural gas beyond decarbonization, and that is to protect California ratepayers from undue uh, economic disparity from expensive electricity and a redundant system that's not very efficient. Thank you for that
Absolutely.
question. From an anonymous, this looks at this SB 100 target, which is retail sales. Do we assume similar sources of electricity for non-retail sales? I'll take a crack at that. Dr. Rodberg, do you know if SB 100 only targeted retail sales, or was that system wide in CAISO?
Well, the state has had difficulty defining that. What they put in the law was a loophole which allows them to have some gas burning attributed to the transmission losses of of the loss in the resistance in the wires that carry the electricity from the power plants or the solar panels to the customer. The the retail sales include uh, purchases by large purchasers. It's the end user. It's all end users. That was the language they used. Retail sales, but it doesn't mean just small homes. It means the final user, so that the final user will see electricity that was generated from clean sources. I mean, I was talking to somebody yesterday about the Tesla they were they were planning on getting, and they don't think when you own an electric vehicle, you think you're doing really good for the environment. You don't think about what it is that's making the electricity that's charging your batteries in your electric vehicle. And today it's combination nationwide. It's a combination of coal, natural gas, and some oil. Uh, so, uh, but
Indeed.
anyway, anyway, I think I answered the question as
And
best I
and
could.
retail and industrial rates, they're all generally sourcing from the same grid. So,
Yeah,
it's generally not a lot of disparity with the generation mix.
right.
Moving on, we've kind of a philosophical question here about those who argue for degrowth are arguing that if solar and wind can't do it, then we need to reduce consumption substantially rather than using nuclear. How do we convince folks to resist the degrowth arguments? I was having a conversation about that last night at an environmental justice event in Oakland, California. And there just seems to be a disconnect between caring for the environment and caring for people. And I think by returning to a lens of social justice that we hold so dear in California and have really been leaders on, caring for people means providing abundant, clean energy for us to live our lives. And I think by leaning in and proving that we can do that, we have done that, and we can continue to do that is an optimistic outlook that a lot of people can sign on to. And some people will be allured by degrowth and nihilism, and that's okay. But I think it's our role as leaders in our community to show an optimistic pathway forward where all people can have a quality of life that we aspire to, and that high energy lifestyle, if it's backed by clean energy, isn't harmful to our ecosystems or our communities. So we can have a prosperous lifestyle without impacting the planet. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to prove that in every category of the economy and our lives. Dr. Rodberg,
Yeah.
anything else to add there?
Yeah, well, let me. I think you put a part of the story very, very well. I think there's some technological confusion there. I mean, look, I'm in a way a technologist. I mean, solar and wind. People think of solar and wind as simple. I mean, the sun we see, but the technology we use to convert that sun into electricity or wind into electricity. That is industrial technology. That is high tech, very complicated, very resource intensive. It requires the mining of all kinds of materials and the sourcing of them from places around the world. This is not some backyard project that we can all do and feel good about being green. This is a complex industrial process. Just making the semiconductors that are in the solar cells requires a major industrial uh, project. In New York State, Micron is planning to build one. It's a multi-billion-dollar factory they're going to build to produce the materials that go into these cells. Uh, Whereas nuclear is a modern technology, but it's fairly simple, fairly straightforward. You put refined uranium together, and it generates heat. And then you convert the heat. Basically, it's a fancy way of boiling water. It's certainly no higher tech, no more complicated, and no more industrial than is solar and wind.
Agreed. And a volunteer group that I'm working with for the to extend the life of Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant is releasing an FAQ soon that we hope can equip the public in talking that not only is new nuclear going to help us achieve this, but even our existing nuclear that powers 20% of the electricity in the United States is capably doing this today, and we have been doing this for 60 years in this country. Moving on, and I want to get to everyone before I have repeat questions. Isn't Michael asks, isn't California planning to import electrical energy from other states? Do the models include these imports?
Um, the models do include the imports, and yes, they are importing now, and they project continuing to import. They would claim that in 45, what they're importing is wind power. Right today, they're importing coal power from Wyoming. Uh, uh, so yes, the importing is in there. It's in that graph. I didn't point to it, but if you get the report and look at it, you'll see. But it's a small part of the total in 2045 compared to the vast fields of solar panels that are envisioned in the state's plan.
Yeah, it's remarkable how much additional solar and storage are coming online by 2045 in the current plan. I will say that we are even expanding our import markets up to Washington and further east so that we can import more power, especially in the evening when the sun goes down, to take pressure off our battery storage systems. And when you see the CAISO grid say that it has unspecified imports, it is mostly coal and natural gas from other states. And my colleague Guido Nunez Mujica, who was on this call earlier, has done some extensive research on that matter. Um, So thank you for that question. And yes, I think imports are another tool for balancing um, peak loads and exporting. And I think what we're seeing nationwide is those imports and exports are targeting nuclear energy as the most valuable resource to be traded across state lines. And so I expect that trend to continue. Another question from Anonymous. What about geothermal for 24/7 power? There has been a movement in California recently. California Public Utilities Commission has set a procurement target of 1 gigawatt of EGS, and Southern California Edison has signed an offtake agreement with Fervo, albeit based in Nevada.
Well, yeah, geothermal is part of the plan. I mean, you mentioned a gigawatt. The number, remember, we're talking about 80 gigawatts of solar being installed under the plan, as well as uh, not comparable, but tens of tens of gigawatts of wind as well. So the geothermal will contribute, but it's small. In other words, the potential is modest. But it's helpful and it's clean and it's local and so clean in the sense of not producing greenhouse gases.
And I'll add that advanced geothermal and nuclear work beautifully together because geothermal generally has a lower capacity factor because you don't want to cool that heat resource. So you kind of want to pull from it strategically. That geothermal can serve as a clean, firm battery resource or a peaking resource to stack on top of baseload nuclear. And, I think once California legalizes nuclear, we'll probably settle on something between the two scenarios that Dr. Rodberg presented, a baseload nuclear and a flex nuclear. I think we'll probably have a bit of both. And something like geothermal could really take pressure off a lot of other resources. And I agree. I think it's a big part of the Western states' electricity future, especially because we have a stronger geothermal resource in the Western United States versus on the East Coast. Thank you for that question. Okay, moving on. Rafat asks, I'm thinking of making renewable energy by making a cycle generator factory that will run by unemployed youth. Just by running cycles, they can generate more energy, and by this process, we can solve unemployment and energy related issues. We can use the heat of active volcanoes and generate more electricity. This requires metals, alloys that has high melting points and good heat conductivity. We can utilize piezoelectricity, which I need to study up on, in our roads. The pressure from vehicles can be utilized to generate electricity. These all sound like phenomenal ideas, and I think, it's all part of our energy future. With California and our industrial energy needs, some of these ideas I'm concerned are not scalable to the level of decarbonization that SB 100 aspires to. Anything to add there, Dr. Rodberg?
Yeah, I think we should be looking at all the technologies, but we're talking large scale. We're talking about converting a society which today runs largely on fossil fuels. Remember, I was talking about electricity today. That's about, I don't know, about 15% of the greenhouse gases that California produces come from the electric grid. The rest of our use of fossil fuels, through automobiles, transportation, heating, industrial heating, making steel. I mean, everything that's made a modern society rests on fossil fuels today. And when we're talking about decarbonizing and replacing fossil fuels with something that doesn't rely on burning hydrocarbons, we're talking about a large scale change. And a small scale technology isn't going to cut it. Nuclear is possible. Nuclear works. We know that the source is uranium plus thorium. Is fissionable too, and the resource is available and will last us centuries. Uh, and it is safe. And people have pointed out if we had discovered fission 10 years earlier, so we had the plants before we went to war, we would have a whole different view of nuclear power today, and we would be well on our way to nuclearizing and
Thank
getting a
you.
cleaner society than we have today.
So we can fit in a few more questions here. Arlene Heyman asks about ordinary people concerned about the safety of nuclear plants. Think Chernobyl, Fukushima, Three Mile Island. Would you speak about safety, please, of the current plants? We would love to speak about that. I think it's a little bit outside of the scope, but we'll follow up with you with some resources. I am a formerly anti-nuclear person, and so I've really done a lot of research to set myself at ease about these. And I think you should follow that curiosity, and I think you will be surprised and reassured by what you find when researching the history of those incidents. Let's see. Lindsay McCormick is asking about have you done any of similar analysis for New York's climate law? As a concerned but non-expert New Yorker, I am worried 100%. I am 100% on board with carbon reduction goals, but I am worried that the law has similar weaknesses to SB 100. You're talking to the perfect person in Dr. Rodberg, and really his research in New York is what we use to translate to California. Do you want to say a few words about that before we move on, Dr. Rodberg?
Sure. Nuclear, sorry, New York's law has been there's a lot of confusion about it because it sets two goals, well, three goals, but the first goal is 70% renewable by 2030 uh, in terms of output of electricity. The state now admits it's not going to meet that target. 2040, the requirement is that the grid be clean. Basically, a more general way of saying what California is aiming at, and that is a reasonable target. Well, I don't think we're going to achieve it for a variety of reasons, but it's a having a clean grid is a itself is a workable target with as long as you bring in nuclear power to be your principal source of electricity. So the law can work. The plan to achieve it so far is lacking, and the state is now on its way to hopefully getting a workable plan.
Phenomenal. Tim Smith writes that California is going to start importing gas from as far away as Pennsylvania towards the end of next year. This is true. We won't be importing the electricity. We will be importing literally natural gas all the way to California, not only to power our natural gas electricity plants, but also, all of our appliances and industrial resources that require natural gas. So, we are deeply committed still to natural gas, and I would like to see our state also deepen our commitment to nuclear fission. So as we wrap up, I want to encourage everyone to contact their state legislator and start the process of repealing the nuclear moratorium in California. It will take an act of our state legislator no matter what. So, and the easiest way would be them to simply write that it no longer applies and we could move forward. There are questions about where would we store nuclear fuel and how could we reprocess that fuel, and those questions are being answered. And so, something that all of us can do is use that link and reach out to your legislators, and let's get to work repealing this moratorium. I want to thank everyone, and sorry we didn't get to all the questions, some phenomenal questions that we will log and follow up with you. And let's keep this conversation going. We'll be posting the recording. Please share it with your friends. Thank you, everyone, for your interest in California's clean energy future and our ability to lead the world. It's time for California to take a sober look at our energy system and make the moves responsible. I want to thank Dr. Rodberg again for his research, phenomenal work, just helping the public understand this. And I think we can all work forward to this together. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.